Sometimes takes a moment for the wording to come back up again.
It looks like it's recording now, Roisin.
Okay. So the course structure then, what I'm going to cover today, and we'll look at what exactly we mean by assertive communication, and also about what assertiveness is not. So, it's important to look at both of those aspects of it. I'll have a look at some verbal and non-verbal ways that we show how assertive or non-assertive that we are. I'll look at the language of assertiveness and maybe some useful phrases to use and some to avoid, and that's equally important. I'll certainly go through some techniques with you. I'll finish off with the techniques about behaving more assertively. Some that if you like them, you might want to try and get into the habit of doing, and some that might help you to prepare for a situation when you want to be assertive. So some would be use it regularly, and some might be, yeah, I'll use that if the situation arises for it. And as usual, as I said, we'll look at some sample interview questions as well. So first of all, I want to say that if you've come to this session with the view that you're not a very assertive person and the hope that you will leave this 1 hour session and suddenly be assertive, then that's not going to happen. I'm telling you straight up now, that's not going to happen. You certainly will be able to make some changes, but you will not suddenly become a different person. And that's not what the aim of the session is about today by any means. It's not about that. These employability skills sessions are all about helping you to be able to talk confidently around these subjects at interview. You'll certainly be able to do that. And I also want you to be able to recognize the difference between assertive behaviours and other types of behaviours. And that's not just about your behaviours, but also about recognizing those behaviours in other people, because that's equally important. I don't think that I know anyone that I would say is assertive all of the time. I mean, 100% of the time. There are certainly people who I would categorize as assertive, but if I delved down, there would be times when they weren't assertive. For me, some of it comes very naturally, some of it comes with practice, and some of it comes with preparation, where you actually decide how you're going to behave. But it's often dependent on factors outside of ourselves. Perhaps you're generally quite assertive, but there might be one particular person that really pushes your buttons and makes you behave more aggressively or passively than you would like to. Perhaps it's when you feel under pressure and feel stressed that you become less assertive. People often behave more aggressively whenever they're under stress. Maybe you stand up for yourself at work or with friends, but then maybe when you go home, you don't stand up for yourself. So I think that generally, rather than trying to, suddenly become assertive all of the time, it's better if we look at particular areas that we would like to work on and concentrate on those. So perhaps we need to behave differently to a manager or a tutor or a friend, whatever the situation might be. I think it's a good idea to practice the techniques generally, but look at how you can make those particular interactions better for you and perhaps for other people as well. So as I say, rather than try and looking at, I'm not an assertive person, but I'm suddenly going to become assertive all of a sudden, look for the particular situations that you might like to become more assertive in instead, and start to work on those instead of trying to do an overall change for yourself. So before we look at the definition, have a quick look at the phrases above it. Passive, assertive, and aggressive. I've already used some of those, and I'm sure that you've heard all of those phrases used before. And probably also passive aggressive. I'm not going to dwell too much on that because, as I said, we've only have an hour for this. So we'll pretty much stick to those three, passive, assertive, and aggressive. But they're basically a spectrum, with passive being submissive type behaviour, assertive behaviour in the middle, and then aggressive at the other end of the spectrum. And I think that this is probably where people get the idea that you can be too assertive. And let's face it, too assertive basically means aggressive. So it's not about being too assertive. It's, edging towards being aggressive. Two different things. Okay, so let's try this out for a definition then. Assertion focuses on communicating and managing situations in a confident way that shows respect for yourself and for other people. It means expressing yourself clearly and showing that you want to work with others to find the best solution. So if you look at that definition, you can't really be too assertive, okay? And I think that that's important to look at. It's important to look at some of the wording here. Respect for yourself and for other people. So if you think about it, if you are showing a lack of respect for yourself, then your behavior is likely, not entirely, but likely to be passive. And if you're showing a lack of respect for others, then your behavior is likely to be more aggressive. It's that assertive behavior that is about respect for yourself and for others. So it's about looking at, that middle ground of showing respect for yourself, showing respect for other people. And it sounds very easy because it's something that we all think, yes, of course, we should be doing that. But then when we look at our own behaviors and the behaviors of other people, we can certainly see occasions when that doesn't happen. It's also about finding solutions to suit all, and that likely means compromise rather than winning. And it's also about expressing yourself clearly. That's, not apologizing for yourself and not avoiding the issue. So there's quite a lot to unpack in that definition there. So I want to give you a better idea of what I mean when I'm talking about passive, assertive, and aggressive behaviors. So if we start with the passive or submissive behaviors, you might hear it called sometimes. So just what I have on the slide there, keeping quiet for fear of upsetting people. Now that might sound like a good thing, but it fits in with the next one, avoiding conflict. So, we're talking about avoiding rather than dealing with, okay? Saying yes when you want to say no, that's a classic one for assertiveness courses. Always putting other people's needs first when sometimes you just have to look after yourself too. Not expressing your feelings, going along with things you don't like or agree with, perhaps fearful or not wanting to upset others. Apologizing excessively, often for things that are not your doing. Inwardly burning with anger and frustration. Sometimes if you don't deal with issues, this is what can happen. Being vague about your ideas and what you want, and that's around not valuing yourself and your opinion, and justifying your actions to other people. Appearing indecisive, and this is often one that's cited against managers, they can't make decisions. And again, it's about respect for yourself and valuing your own opinion. So you can see why you might get some interview questions around those sort of things, around, making decisions around your values and being decisive and how you interact with other people. So, as I said, whereas you may not get an interview that actually uses the word assertive communication, it can come up in different formats. And then the one that we're aiming for, assertive behavior, being open and honest with yourself and other people, listening to other people's points of view, showing understanding of the other people's situations, expressing your ideas clearly, but not at the expense of others, being able to reach workable solutions to difficulties. So again, it's that, not that have to win thing, but that compromise. Making decisions as opposed to being indecisive. Being clear about your point and not being sidetracked about it. Dealing with conflict, and again, as opposed to causing it or avoiding it. Having self-respect and respect for other people. Being equal with others and retaining your uniqueness. That's a funny one in some ways there, but it's basically about accepting who you are and being happy with that and not having to justify who you are to others. Expressing feelings honestly and with care. And I think that that's, important to say, expressing your feelings with care, because it's easy to go away from an assertiveness course and say, oh, I have to express all my feelings, but it's not at the expense of others. So it is about being appropriate and taking into account the feelings of others as well. I think that if you can really take on board the having self-respect and respect for other people and see how that plays out in your own life and in your own behaviours, then that can really make a difference to how assertive you are. It's probably also a good phrase to keep in mind when you're considering how you answer interview questions. So, how can I show that I've dealt with this situation in a manner that shows I have respect for myself, but I also have respect and care for other people? Okay. So, aggressive behavior then, and I think that mostly people, know what aggressive behavior is, but it can also be very subtle. And I think that it's important to recognize it and to label it as aggressive behavior. Because I think if you do that, you're more likely to do something about it if you're faced with it. So if you actually recognize it for what it is, you're more likely to actually deal with it. So getting your own way, no matter what, getting your own point across at other people's expense, not willing to listen to others or give them their place, getting people to do things they don't want to do. Now, I've thought about that one. It could be construed as good management, but it's about how it's done and also about the intent behind it. Being loud and violent, we all know that one. Interrupting others, you might not always see that as aggressive, but it can be, especially if you're on the receiving end of it. So talking over other people. Winning at all costs, using sarcasm and putting people down and generally making them feel small. And, not all aggressive behavior is obvious or direct. There's also indirect aggressive behavior, which can be conveyed in a seemingly nice, polite way. It can be quiet and apparently inoffensive on the surface. For example, I could be in a meeting and say something at the meeting, which maybe to most people at the meeting would mean nothing, but perhaps one person would know that I was directing it at them. Okay, and the other people in the meeting wouldn't understand that, but that one person would know that I was behaving aggressively towards them. Manipulating or tricking people, ignoring people, that phrase, sending someone to Coventry. Being silent, and think of walking into a room and the conversation ends and you're met with silence. That can be a very aggressive sort of behavior, but not necessarily something that you would call aggressive. So as I say, it's good to be able to put that sort of language on it. So let's be very clear, this is not a list of how to be aggressive, because that's not what I'm aiming for here. It's about recognizing behaviors as aggressive behaviors. It might be your own behaviors, and that's important to consider as well, or it might be other people's behaviors. So what assertiveness is not then? Assertiveness is not about getting one over on someone else, but equally not letting others get one over on you. It's that win-win. It's not about getting the better of other people, but it is about getting the best out of others. It's also not about being the winner, because you're looking for a solution that suits both of you. Remember that compromise situation. And it's not about changing other people. However, I would add to that, your assertive behavior will have an impact on how other people behave. If you think of it, it's very difficult to behave, for example, aggressively to someone who's behaving assertively. So whilst you're not necessarily setting out to change other people's behaviors, your own behavior will have an impact on the behavior of other people. So it's important to think about that. So there are many benefits to behaving assertively, but it does not guarantee that you will get what you want. It just helps. Okay, but it is important to be aware of that. Okay, so I'm going to flash up a few pictures of people that I hope you will recognize. They're, celebs, or at least recognize some of them. And I want you to think about whether you would consider them to be passive, assertive, or aggressive. It's just your own opinion. It's not a test or anything. If you want, you can pop some comments into the chat. So, they don't have to be right or anything like that. You just, if you think that somebody might be passive, assertive, or aggressive, put it in and maybe say why you think that. Okay, so some of the celebrities then. The Irish actress Saoirse Ronan. I'll not go too quickly through them so that you have a moment to think about whether you think that Saoirse might be passive, assertive, or aggressive. And then we have Harry Styles, formerly of One Direction. And is Harry passive, assertive, or aggressive? Then we have Zendaya or Zendaya. I don't know how you pronounce that properly, but you'll know who I mean probably. And is Zendaya passive, assertive, or aggressive? Don't see anything coming into the chat, so just to encourage you, if you've any opinions on that, just pop it in there. And then we have David Beckham, passive, assertive, or aggressive David. And then we have Michelle Obama. And Ed Sheeran. Do you think Ed might be passive, aggressive, or assertive? Oh, we've got one there for Michelle who thinks assertive. Ed Sheeran, passive. Okay. And Dua Lipa. Would Dua Lipa be passive, assertive, or aggressive? And I think my final one is Dev Patel, who I last saw in The Green Knight, which my husband loved and I didn't. But I like him. So I'm assuming that no one actually knows any of these people personally. If you do, please let us know. I certainly don't. So with a few comments come in there about them. Just to clarify, I have no idea if these people are assertive or not. I have never met them, and I very rarely heard them be interviewed. And I certainly know next to nothing about them outside of their actual jobs, outside of the public persona that, I see of them. But I want you to think about why you might have considered that person to be passive, assertive, or aggressive. What do you actually know about any of them? I know some of you put in comments there. Lots of you will have thought about what you think that they might be, whether you typed it in or not. But I want you to think about, why did you form that opinion about them? Because what we see is generally only the public persona. And what we mostly do not know, is about how they are as private people. We don't know what they are like when they are not being interviewed, when they're at home with their families, when they're working with maybe behind the scenes people. So mostly what we judge people on are the behaviors that we can see. We've no idea what's actually going on in their heads. And that is important because it means that I can learn to show assertive behaviors, even if it's something that I have to practice, because you won't see what's going on in my head, and I don't see what's going on in your head. So when you consider whether or not I'm assertive or you are assertive, remember it is all about our behaviors, and that includes our communication rather than, what is actually going on in your head. Nobody knows what's going on in anybody's head. Now, let me be clear about that. I'm not saying that those two things are not connected and in a few different ways. For example, if I have a high level of self-esteem, then I'm likely to value what my opinions are. Okay, and that will come out in assertive behaviour. If I have a high level of respect for others, then I'm likely to treat them as equals. If I behave assertively, people are likely to treat me with more respect. And that in turn will have an impact on how I think about myself. So I'm not saying that what is in your head is not connected to your behaviours. Of course it is. I'm just saying that we will judge others on their behaviours, and we ourselves will be judged on our behaviours too. So it's important to think about that because, as I said, that's your public persona then. Okay? So, do you recognize yourself in any of these situations? So, I think when we look at a list of assertive behaviors, it's very easy to say, yes, I do that. And sometimes it's only when we actually look at how we feel about ourselves in particular situations in our lives that we can really identify how assertive or unassertive we might be and what things affect us. And as I said to you, I don't think that there's anybody that I know certainly that's assertive 100% of the time. So it's about looking at, well, what are the situations that I personally don't feel that I'm assertive in, that I might behave more passively or I might behave more aggressively. So here's a few things to consider. Do you recognize yourself in any of these situations? I get angry when someone criticizes me. Most people don't like to be criticized, but how do you behave whenever that happens? Nobody listens to my opinions. Have you ever thought that about yourself? I always seem to be in the midst of confrontations. And if that's the case, then why might that be? People tell me to speak up. Now, might be something to do with their hearing, might be something to do with how you speak. I end up doing what nobody else wants to do. My ideas just get dismissed. Okay, so, have a think. Do any of these sort of resonate with you? Which one would you see as the most challenging for you? I'm just asking rhetorically there. It's just to give you an opportunity to think about whether any of those things make you feel, yeah, actually, I feel that I probably behave a bit more passively or a bit more aggressively in those situations than I would want to. So, moving on then, what are the benefits to you personally of being assertive? At the beginning of the session, I said that if you do not consider yourself to be assertive before the session, then you're not going to leave this session and suddenly be assertive. And anyway, I always think that, yes, of course, we should always be trying to develop ourselves, but, we're okay to start with. We don't have to become completely different people. And we certainly don't all have to become the same or act the same as everybody else. So rather than look at the big picture of being more assertive, as I've said to you, I think it's important to look at particular situations where you might prefer to be more assertive. For example, is there a particular person that you wish you could maybe react differently to? Is there a particular question that you would like to formulate a better response to? Is there something that you want to say to someone, but you haven't found the right words for? Is there a question that you want to ask, but you haven't? Think about the sort of times when you've maybe not dealt with situations the way that you would like to have. So if you think about what particular situations in your life that you would want to work on, then it might be easier to see what difference being assertive might make to your life. Okay, so look at the particular situations, the particular people that you deal with in certain ways, just to see what sort of difference being assertive might make to you personally. So it's not about becoming a different person, it's about looking at what might make things better for you. That's what it's all about here. So obviously what we say and how we say it is very important. It's about that sort of language of what assertiveness, sounds like. So I just want to move on to the language of assertiveness. So here are some phrases, and I want you to consider if they're more passive, assertive, or aggressive. Now, I'm well aware that it depends on the situation, it depends on the people involved, and it very much depends on how it's said. But overall, what does the phrase sound like to you? So I'm just going to read then from the slides here, and I'll try to keep my voice slightly more monotone. Can we discuss this? So would that be a passive, an assertive, or an aggressive phrase? I'm really sorry to bother you. Again, passive, assertive, or aggressive. I don't suppose you'll agree, but just be thinking about if you said that, how would it come across? I'm not willing to. So is that passive, assertive, or aggressive? And again, it could be an it depends. I'm not sure which one you're referring to there, but if you want to keep commenting, that's brilliant. I feel strongly about this issue. Again, passive, assertive, or aggressive? Assertive, thank you. You would say that, wouldn't you? Passive, assertive, or aggressive? How does that sound to you? Is that passive, assertive, or aggressive? And remember that, I'm trying to make, it's hard actually in a way to do these phrases in a monotone. But obviously the different sort of tones that I put on these phrases can make them sound different as well. So, how does that sound to you? Could be quite passive. How does that sound to you? That might have woken some of you up there. Could be quite aggressive. It just depends on how it's said as well. I've heard it all now. Passive, assertive, or aggressive. And oh, come on. Again, oh, come on, right? And you can see, even with the exclamation mark on the end of that one, that was probably a dead giveaway for you on that one. I'd be putting that one at more aggressive, actually. Here's some summary of it. So the passive ones there, and I'm not sure that I've included, I'm not sure that I've included all of them on there. But the passive ones that I've got there, I'm really sorry to bother you. I don't suppose you'll agree, but. And again, lots of us start our sentences with, sorry to interrupt, sorry to, and it can sound a bit like your time's so much more important than my time is. Okay. It's not an awful thing to do by any means. This is only to get you thinking about what language you use and how it might come across. You don't have to cut every sorry uh, out of your language, by the way. It's very important to be in there sometimes, but it's about, thinking about how you start your sentences, and are you already putting yourself in sort of a passive light by starting with, you're not going to agree with this, or I'm sorry to, be bothering you about this. So just consider that. The assertive ones that I have there then is, can we discuss this? Because it's giving that sort of two-way. Your opinion's important, but so's mine. How does that sound to you? I feel strongly about this issue, which, you could say the same thing in a much, much more aggressive way. Let the person know that you feel very strongly about it. But saying it in that way is the assertive way to do it. And I'm not willing to. Now, that, again, you could put that into all three of those, depending on your situation and how it comes across as well. But I put it in assertive there because it's basically you saying what your stand on something is. Okay? That, it might be, I'm willing to discuss, but I'm not willing to do. Okay? The aggressive there, and again, you're not talking about thumping the table or raising your voice or anything else, but just those sort of phrases that can put other people down. So I've heard it all now. Kind of sounds like you're talking absolute rubbish here. Okay. You would say that, wouldn't you? Again, that's automatically going to put the person on a real defensive. And oh, come on. again sounds like what you're saying is quite ridiculous. Okay, so have a look at those. There are many, many more, passive, assertive, and aggressive phrases that I could be using there, but I've only got a short time to go through some of them. And of course, the key thing is to look at the words and phrases that you tend to use. So do you start your sentences with the word sorry? If you're asked to do something, do you always say no problem? I see that coming up in time management courses time and time again, where people automatically say, yeah, it's no problem, when it's actually a huge problem. So, consider what phrases and things that you're using that might be putting you at a disadvantage. Okay. Do you say that's rubbish when someone gives their opinion? Do you use sarcasm or put downs to people to be funny? Um, and what phrases do other people say to you that you might need to address as well? Because, this is about the phrases that you use, but it's also about recognizing whenever other people are doing that as well. Okay, so we have looked a little bit about what assertive communication might sound like, and what it is. What it is and what it sounds like. And of course, we know that our body language is also a big part of how we communicate assertively. So if we think of aggressive body language, we're likely to be thinking of things like, finger pointing or jabbing, maybe eye rolling, clenched fists, banging the table, and even crowding someone else's space. Okay, various forms of aggressive sort of language. Passive body language then might be things like lack of eye contact, where you won't actually look at the person talking or when you're talking. Maybe your hands covering your mouth when you're trying to express yourself. Maybe some nervous gestures such as fidgeting or twiddling your hair, something like that. Assertive body language then, very important to have the posture correct. So the posture is likely to be upright, relaxed, and at the appropriate distance. That's that not crowding someone. You're likely to use open gestures with direct eye contact. And importantly, the tone of your voice will match the words that you're using, as will the facial expressions. So again, some of that might be something that you need to practice. So it's not just about using the phrase, but making the phrase sound sincere as well. Okay. So they will frown when they're angry. They will smile when they're happy. The facial expressions match the actual feelings. Their body language is open and honest, and it doesn't try to conceal. So, as well as monitoring the words and the phrases that we use, we also have to consider our body language. It, I admit, is more difficult for you to actually change. The language is easier to change, but you have to consider that as well. So, if you're practicing, at least consider maybe some of the gestures that you might use. So, for example, try and use eye contact. Try not to cover your mouth when you're talking. Those ones can be more obvious to spot and perhaps a little bit easier to manage, even if you have to sit on your hands whenever you're doing an online session or something. Okay, so I'm going to move on to some tools and techniques, folks. And I'm just going to go over 3 of them here. So these are sometimes used, if you want to actually practice a situation. So I'll talk you through those anyway, but I'm going to look at I statements, at fogging, and at the broken record technique. And I have to say, when I was putting this together and I was thinking of the age of many of you, I'm sure, you probably haven't never actually heard a broken record, but it's also called repeated assertion. But I find broken record much easier to remember, so I'm going to stick with that. And vinyl's coming back, isn't it? So you'll all become aware of broken records at some point. So I statements then. I think this is really useful one because it's an easy one to remember. It's an easy one to practice, and you can use it in a lot of situations. And you don't have to use these exact words, by the way. trying to sort of rephrase it so as it suits you, but not so it goes down a passive or an aggressive line. Okay, so I'm giving you the sort of phrases that might be useful for you, but change it how it's going to be suitable for you. It's useful, one, because as I said, it's easy to remember. It's quite easy to make it fit into lots of situations. You're basically putting your views across, but allowing for the other person's views as well. So you're opening an exchange about what you would like to happen. And there are three main components of an assertive statement. So the first one then, I feel. So that's what my position is, what I want, what I feel, how I see the situation. Okay, so I feel. I understand, and now you're talking about the other person's position, what you might want, what you might feel or need, and how you might see the situation. And that might be something that you have to actually clarify, by the way. And the third bit of it, I would like what it is that you're actually requesting. What would you like to happen? So communicating how you feel shows you to be open and direct, and no one can disagree with the way that you feel. So whenever you start your sentence with I feel, well, nobody can say, no, you don't feel that way, right? Because only you know how you feel. So they may not understand it, they may not like it, but your emotional state is your own, and being able to disclose it in an appropriate way is an essential element of assertive communication. So your understand statement is about the other person, their situation, their thoughts and feelings. And the information that you give here is going to be based on the information that you've received from the other person. And that's why I said to you, you might need to clarify that bit of it. Your I would like statement then is about what you would like to happen. You show how you would like the situation to be resolved and what outcomes you would prefer. And this part of the statement leads on to discussion and possibly negotiation as well. So I'll give you an example of that one, just to make a little more sense of it. So your boss asks you to work late again, and unfortunately, as usual, has left it to the last minute to ask you. So you might say, I feel stressed, or I feel under pressure when you ask me to work overtime at the last minute. I understand that you need the reception desk covered. I would like if you could give me more notice so that I could plan my evening. And of course, you could switch those words up a bit. So instead of saying, I would like you, to, you might say, I'd appreciate it if, or it would be great if, so you're using your language, but in the same sort of format, as long as you make it a strong, positive statement. Okay, so that is the I statement technique. And I'm just going to move on to fogging. And fogging it's a really simple technique, but it is not for everyone. It is used when someone is maybe complaining at you, so it might be quite good in a customer care situation, or when someone's very angry and you basically want to avoid an argument. So it's not something that you're going to use every day, hopefully. It's really important that you see it as a tool for you to use. And I think that helps you to feel powerful and not like you're giving your power away. Okay, so think of it, if you're in that situation, it's sort of right, what can I do about this? Oh, I know, I could use fogging. It's something to help me deal with the situation. So, as I say, it's used when someone is angry at you. And this means that you really have to be able to exercise self control and stay calm in the face of the criticism. So, basically, you stay quiet and don't interrupt and allow the other person to let off steam. And some of you might be, hearing that, you might be going, oh, I could never do that. I want to get in there. Okay. But, you have to think about what behavior you're trying to get across here. And we're talking about assertive behavior. So the fogging situation is that you don't interrupt, you let the other person, let off steam, then pause, and then you agree with part of what the angry person is saying. Even if you don't agree with the entire criticism, right? You're finding something that you can agree with. And basically, that will slow them down and essentially, hopefully, calm them down as well. And the term fogging is used because if you were driving on the motorway and you hit a blanket of fog, you'd automatically slow down. So by creating the fog, by agreeing with your angry person, you slow them down. You kind of stop them in their tracks a bit. It's very hard to be really angry with someone who is agreeing with you. It might take a few moments for them to hear what you're actually saying. But you can get there with it. So some typical fogging phrases you'll see on the slide there. You're probably right. That's true. You have a point there. I agree. And of course, you have to have the tone of voice and the body language has to be appropriate, has to be sincere. So if you deliver one of those with a sarcastic tone or a curl of the lip, then it will just create more anger. So it has to be done sincerely. If it was me, I'd probably be saying something like, "Yeah, you're absolutely right." Okay? Or getting a part of the conversation where you can say, "Yeah, that should never have happened. That was done really badly." Something like that, okay? So that's fogging. Not to be used all the time. Some of you won't really particularly like that, but it might be useful for you at some stage. Okay, and then the broken record technique, the last one that I'm going to go over with you. And this is good if you feel that your rights are being ignored, or you know that you're likely to give in to someone, or you want to say no to someone. And it just simply means that you keep saying the same point, maybe in a slightly different way. You don't allow yourself to be distracted from your point. You're basically like a broken record, a record when the needle has got stuck and it repeats over and over. And again, it's important that you don't get angry or irritated. You just persistently stick to your point. So, a simple example there on the slide. Can you take me to Tesco's in the car? It's raining. I can't take you right now. But it's raining and I need to do a big shop. You know I would do the same for you. I can't take you right now. It will only take half an hour. And so you might give them a little bit more here. I know it wouldn't take that long, but I can't take you right now. You can borrow my umbrella if you want. I'll get the bus, it finishes with. Um, it's not an easy thing to do. I'm not trying to say that sticking to your guns like that is easy. But if it was easy, you wouldn't need a technique in the first place. So decide what your response is going to be. Remember, it is about respect for you and for the other person. So it's not a rude response or anything like that. It's just here's what I can do at the minute, and then stick to your guns. So those are a few of the techniques that you can try out and practice. There are other techniques, but I think those three are pretty good for starting with, actually. And I think that if you want to behave assertively, then you have to keep in mind that it is about your needs and about other people's needs. And finding that midway point means that you treat others and yourself with that respect. And you might find that you naturally show more respect for others than yourself. That does happen. And you might behave more passively because of that. But equally, you might show little respect for others and behave more aggressively. And I think, just as people don't behave assertively 100% of the time, nor does anybody behave passively or aggressively 100% of the time. It's about finding those situations where you tend to revert to particular types of behaviors. So even if you can't remember any of those techniques, just think about respect for yourself and your needs and respect for others and their needs, and you won't go too far wrong. So just a few little pointers to round things up then, some do's and some don'ts. So do decide what you want, because unless you've made that decision, in the conversation or something, then you can't get to the point that you want to get to. Decide if it is fair. Ask clearly for it, because the other person can't be expected to know what you want unless you're clear about your wants and your needs. Be calm and relaxed. That can often be the hardest part of it. Express your feelings openly and appropriately, so with care for the other person. Give and take compliments easily, even if that's the first thing you start with. That can be a really good one. And give and take fair criticism. That was one of the things that I asked at the beginning, if you find difficult, and maybe something some of you might want to work on. Don't beat about the bush. Don't go behind other people's backs, and don't bottle up your feelings. So those are all about being assertive. And I want to finish with this. I don't do quotes very often, but I really do value this one. So before we move on to interview questions, just take a moment to ponder on this. We teach others how to treat us by what we allow, what we stop, and what we reinforce. And so if you think about that and you think, that you agree that it's true, and I certainly think that there's a lot of truth to it, how are you teaching others how to treat you? So consider if your behaviors are encouraging, negative behaviors of others. Be honest about it. I think that honestly is one for pinning up on your notice board. We teach others how to treat us by what we allow, what we stop, and what we reinforce. So consider how you are teaching others to behave towards you. Okay, so I'm going to finish the actual topic there and move on to the interview stuff. So if any of you, before we move off that, want to put any questions in, then I'm happy to look at that. But for interview preparation, and if you've been on with me before, you'll know that I always remind you about the STAR technique for effectively answering interview questions. Basically, you want to be able to tell the interviewer your story by putting your answer into context for them. So when you're formulating an answer for your interview, try and follow this STAR technique. It is easy once you get into the hang of it, folks, and it's a very good way for making your answers clear, making them logical, and it means that you're getting across the main points that you need to. So start by listening to the question carefully. Think of the example that you're going to use. Hopefully you will have prepared an answer or, a similar answer ahead of time. But even if you are thinking on your feet, frame your answer into situation, task, action, and result. So describe the event or situation that you were in. Explain the task that you had to complete. What were the challenges? Describe the specific actions that you personally took to complete the task. If you worked as part of a team, you can say that you worked as part of a team, but you do want to be making sure that you're saying what you as an individual did as part of that team. Finish with the results. What was the results of your actions? Were there benefits? Were there savings? What was the impact? And then one of the things that I want to make you aware of is the software that's available to you to practice interviews. It's called ShortlistMe. And Karen will put a link into the chat for you, but you can also find it on the careers website. And the package provides really good interviews for specific companies like Virgin Media, AstraZeneca, but it also provides a chance to interview for roles. So there's a broad range of opportunities for you to practice your interviews. Once you register, you're in control of the interview practice, but you only have 3 days to complete the interview at a time that suits you. So do be careful about that. When you register, you've only 3 days to complete it. So register at a time that you're going to be able to do that. Perhaps over the Christmas holidays might be a good opportunity for you to do that. Now, you're not interacting with any real life people, so there is really nothing to be wary of. You'll be responding to pre-recorded questions as if it was an online interview. You get a short amount of time to prepare your answer, and then you give your answer. And it's 5 or 6 questions for each interview. And the important thing is that you can get some feedback on how you did. Again, this is automated feedback, so you're not interacting with anyone. But it is a really good interactive quality experience. I think Karen just put that link into the chat. So I would say make the most of that opportunity, folks. So moving on to interview questions, and I've a couple of pages of these here. As I said to you, they're not likely to ask you about communicating assertively specifically. It's questions that'll be in different guises, basically. So demonstrate how you vary your communication approach according to the audience you're addressing. Tell us about a situation where your communication skills made a difference to a situation. What big decision did you make recently? How did you go about it? Now, to be fair, that's probably going to be more about your decision-making process. I've put it in there because, one of the things at the beginning is about assertive people are more likely to be decisive as well. Describe a time when you faced resistance or negativity and how you responded to this. So again, none of these questions are going to be completely about communicating assertively, but there's an element of it in there as well. Give us an example where you were unable to deal with a difficult member of your team. Tell us about a time when you had to calm an angry customer. How do you ensure that you maintain good working relationships with your colleagues? And the second set of questions, how do you bring difficult colleagues on board? Give us an example where you had to do this. Which recent project or situation has caused you the most stress? How did you deal with it? And again, that's in there because sometimes dealing with these situations can cause you stress, and behaving assertively can reduce that. So again, it's not a question about assertive communication, but there's some implied parts to it as well. So that's why it's in there too. Give us an example where you were unable to deal with a difficult member of your team. Can you give an example of a time you influenced a colleague or manager to adopt your way of thinking? Tell us about a time when someone asked you to do something you objected to. How did you handle the situation? That could be assertive communication. It could also be about your values, but most of it's going to be about how did you deal with it. Describe the personal skills needed to deal with conflict between other people. So lots of questions there. I think of all of the sessions that I do, those are probably the most varied of questions. As I say, it's not likely to be coming up in terms of communicating assertively, but your communication skills in generally will come up in that. So, any questions, folks? And Karen, feel free to add in anything that you might want to yourself.
Yeah, pardon me, I've just been enjoying it. It's been very informative.
You didn't fall asleep, Karen, then? No.
Certainly didn't.
Folks, I'm going to stop recording, and if there's any questions, then you might feel happier.